So today I wanted to step through what it is that the firm Abelara does. And what I'd like to communicate is that everything that we do centers around the Ascent methodology. So we have developed a proprietary methodology built on a very well-known framework, which is people, process, and technology. And so the foundations of the Ascent methodology recognize that you need to do good things in all three of those pillars in order to achieve digital transformation and, more importantly, the outcomes that you're looking for from your manufacturing organization. But we do it in a very specific way. So let me step very briefly through those three pillars and know that in the upcoming weeks, we're going to flesh out each of the modules of the Ascent methodology, and we'll spend about a week deep diving into each of the modules to communicate what all of them are about. But let's start with people. So on the people side, we view people as both individuals, but also as the teams and departments that are trying to coordinate things together to make good things happen on the manufacturing floor. So if you are the CEO, if you're the president, it stands to reason that you really only have three simple goals. You want to increase revenue. You want to increase profitability, be that gross margin, operating margin, or net profit margin. And you want to set up a workplace that is fun, engaging, and healthy for your employees. And so while that's easy to say, it's probably obvious that's extraordinarily difficult to actually do in the real world. So why is it so difficult? Here is where the Ascent methodology acknowledges a two-tier problem that every executive and every manufacturing team will run into. So first and foremost, let's use supply chain as an example. Tier one problem is every individual department, when going for their goals in good faith, doing the best they can, they face trade-offs within their own department. This we call the tier one problem. In supply chain, the most significant tier one problem is supply chain must make sure that there are no stockouts. The parts need to be there when the manufacturing team wants them, and they need to keep inventory and working capital to a minimum. So those are fundamentally opposed. I'll say in the vast majority of cases, those are fundamentally opposed goals. Anybody can have no stockouts when you're allowed to have 180 days of inventory. It's much harder when you get to 90 days of inventories and below. That's the level one problem. Now, let's also acknowledge a level two problem. The level two problem goes beyond the borders of the individual person and department. And so in supply chain, a classical one that you'll run into is supply chain also has to get PPI and PPV. That means acquiring the same parts at a lower overall cost. And so for a really expensive machined part, a well-intending supply chain employee might switch vendors. We'll go from vendor A, who is extremely high cost, to vendor B, who can make the part identically according to the print, but at half the cost. That sure looks like a clean win. And so you implement the first batch that you buy, you've saved a ton of money. You're now at half the cost of the original part, but yields on the factory floor unexpectedly plummet. Oh my goodness, what the heck has happened? They made the part identically according to the print. How could this have happened? Well, of course, what happened is the original vendor has a decade of understanding your unique process and worked out a whole bunch of kinks that are not documented on the drawing. You can call that tribal knowledge, you can call it whatever you want, but know that vendor A probably has a whole lot of tricks of the trade unique to that part for you that disappear when you switch to vendor B. And so this is the essence of the tier two problem in the people pillar. The tier two problem is well-intending departments doing exactly what their mission is will cause unintended negative consequences in other departments. And you have to have both tier one and two-tier problems visible to all teams in order to find ways to mitigate them. So that is how we look at the people side. Now let's go to process. On the process side, in any manufacturing organization, there are maybe a dozen or so core processes that everybody has. And usually those processes happen to map to a software offering in the market. So a couple of simple examples, everybody must have a financial accounting and controls system somewhere that is always the ERP. And so the ERP system has to do that. The supply chain team has to coordinate thousands of parts and hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors and all of their purchasing and supplies and arriving at the warehouse. That's super hard to do. And so there exists a software category called supply chain planning and so on. Factory floor, you have to coordinate technicians and machines and the parts and builds and orders. That's called manufacturing execution systems. And so it's very rare for any one company to have all 12 of these particular categories. Much more common that you have a subset of them and others you consolidate into the ERP, for example. But it's really critical to at least understand the functions that underlie these 12 systems, because whether you're doing them scrappily inside of Excel or half scrappily inside of an ERP or in a fit for purpose system like a supply chain planning suite that does only that, regardless of the case, it's important to know what the functionality is that each of these 12 big processes achieve. So that's pillar 2. That's the process pillar for the Ascent methodology. And then finally, let's go to technology. On the technology side, manufacturers, as you know, have a really difficult challenge. They need to keep up with an extraordinary number of technological breakthroughs and new trends across a really wide array of technologies. And so as a manufacturing employee, you are often asked to be able to know, what is an MQTT server and why do I care and what can it possibly do for me? What is cloud compute? What is the difference between edge AI and cloud AI? LLMs are now out. But MCP, oh my gosh, is that a critical protocol for us to study and deploy right now? Or should I wait until the people work out the big problems? You're forever faced with a series of technology problems that is extraordinarily difficult to keep on top of. And so pillar 3 of the Ascent methodology looks at manufacturing and process plants and identifies the core technologies that we believe will constitute the next generation stack for all of those industries. And so the hard part, of course, it's one thing if an end customer had fully mastered all 3 of those pillars. They understand trade-offs in people and departments in pillar 1. They understand all 12 processes inside and out in pillar 2, and they know everything there is to know about technology, pillar 3. There remains a couple of really critical challenges, and this is where the Ascent methodology shines. We go out of our way to acknowledge that each plant will have a different array of maturity in each of these facets, and the best path forward for you, depending upon which combination of those things that you have, will be very different. And so the final aspect of the Ascent methodology is what we call integration. In some cases, that integration is prototypical system integration from an IT or a control system perspective. But importantly, it also includes integrating together the different departments who need to understand these tier 2 unintended consequences of each of their actions and to make them visible. So when you see Abelara talking a lot about visibility, this is specifically what we're referring to. Educating about the 12 processes and making visible to everyone the unintended tier 2 consequences of otherwise well-intended initiatives from an individual department. So that, in a brief summary, is the Ascent methodology. And so we're going to take it step by step. Over the next several weeks, we'll do a deep dive into each aspect of the Ascent methodology. In the interim, we would love to hear from you. If any of this is of interest to you, please go ahead and click the like and subscribe buttons. And we're very open for debate. Would love to hear from you. And that is my speech, and I'll stop there.